In the last video, we started talking about how we were going to create a language store component. The language store is going to contain all of our business logic and our data and make it available to other components inside of our component hierarchy over the context system. So in this video, we're going to start to create this language store component. We're going to go a little bit light on the description of exactly what's happening because I think everything's going to be a lot more clear once you see the completed example. So let's get to it. I'm going to open up my code editor and I'll find the language context.js file. So inside of here, we're going to continue to create this context object and export it. But in addition, we are also going to create this language store component. So inside of language context.js, I'm going to first remove the export default statement right there. And I'm going to instead assign it to a variable called context like so. Now notice that this is defined with a capital C. That is very important. Please make sure that you use a capital C as well. And then after that, I'm going to declare a new class-based component called language store. And that's going to extend react.component. So inside of this class right here, we're going to set up some state property that's going to maintain the currently selected language. We're also going to implement a callback function inside there that gives other components the ability to change that currently selected language. So inside of language store, I'm going to set up my state object, and I'm going to say language is by default English. And then after that, I'm going to implement a callback function that we can pass off to other components so that they can change this state property. So I'll say on language change. This is going to be a callback function, so I'm going to define it as an arrow function. We'll say that this is going to get defined, or excuse me, called with the new language as an argument. And so we will call inside of here this.setState language, like so. Okay, so this right here is all of our business logic. It's our current set of data, or the current selected language, and we also have the ability to change the currently selected language as well. So now the next thing we're going to do is define our render method. Inside the render method, we're going to set up a language context provider. And as the value property, we're going to pass off the currently selected language and that callback we just created as well. So this render method with the provider is how we're going to share the current data along with the ability to change it with other components inside of our application. So in my render method, I'm going to return context with a capital C right here. Remember, we assigned that context we created to capital C context dot provider. The value is going to be the combination of everything out of our state object and this callback function as well. So the value is all of our data and the ability to change that data as well. So as my value, I'm going to put in an empty object inside of here. And I'm going to add in all the different values from my state object. So I'll say ... this.state. Remember this syntax right here, very similar to what we did with Redux earlier. We are creating a new object. We're taking all the values out of our current state object and adding them into that object. And then in addition, we're also going to take this callback function and add it in there as well. So on language change. I'm then going to close off that provider tag like so. Now the language store is going to be used or rendered at some location inside of our application. Remember, anytime that we place a provider, only the components underneath it or only the components that get wrapped by this provider will have access to the context that is implemented by this provider. So essentially, we need to make sure that this language store component is going to wrap all of these different components when it finally gets rendered. To do so, inside of the provider tag, we're going to place a set of curly braces and reference this.props.children. So what's going on here? Well, quick reminder back to like the first section of this course. One of the things that we learned very early on was that we could create our own components. I'm going to show you down here as a quick example. I'm going to delete this really quickly, so you don't have to write this out if you don't want to. We saw that we could create our own components, like say language store. And we could pass our own component some amount of JSX, like say a div or a form, or even another component that we create, like say language selector or whatever it might be. Whenever we pass some JSX to a component we create, these components right here show up inside of that parent component on props.children. So this right here is what's going to make sure that we can render some components inside of our language store. And so all the components rendered inside of it are going to have access to this context object that we just implemented. All right. Now, one other quick thing I want to mention here, why did we use a capital C on the variable context? Well, anytime that we create a component ourselves and try to render it out using JSX, we have to use a capital C for that variable. If you use a lowercase, like so lowercase context, React is going to think that this is a normal vanilla HTML element that you're trying to render out, like say a div or a form or a span or whatever. So any component we create has to have a capital letter. That's why we used capital C context. Okay, that's all we have to do for the language store class. So now the last thing we have to do inside this file is make sure that we export the language store and make it available to other files inside of our application. We also have to continue to export this context object as well. And I'll tell you why that is in just a moment. So first, I'm going to export our class language store. Notice how I only use the word export here. So we've set up language store as a named export. That means that anytime that we try to import it, we're going to have to use the curly braces and say like language store, like so. In addition, at the bottom of the file, I'm also going to export default context as well, just as we did previously. So now anytime we import the language context file, we will either write out import context, or really language context, because for a default export we can rename it when we import it, or we will write out import language store if we want the component itself. So those are the two things that we can now import from this file. All right, so that is our language store component. It encapsulates all the data around the currently selected language, and it also implements the ability to change that data as well. So now that we've put this component together, we'll take a quick pause right here, and when we come back to the next section, we'll figure out how to make use of it. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a moment.